"Don't unfasten my dress," she cried. But the Apache didn't and helped her heal the scars. She had not always been afraid of mirrors. There was a time when she would stand in front of one and smile at her own reflection without thinking twice. She used to tilt her head from side to side, adjust her earrings, smooth her hair, and walk out of the house with confidence in her step. Back then, her laughter came easily. It filled rooms. It made other people feel warm and welcome. Her name was Alara, and before everything changed, she loved bright colors. She loved summer dresses that moved with the wind and soft fabrics that felt light against her skin. She enjoyed simple things: morning sunlight through the kitchen window, music playing while she cleaned, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery near her street. She had dreams, too. They were not huge dreams of fame or wealth. They were simple dreams of peace, family, and a life full of small happy moments. Then the accident happened. It was sudden, loud, and terrifying. A fire broke out in the small building where she worked. At first, no one understood how serious it was. There was smoke, then confusion, then panic. People rushed toward the exit. Someone shouted. Something heavy fell. In those few terrible minutes, everything changed. Alara did not remember every detail clearly. She only remembered heat, a powerful burning heat that felt like it was everywhere. She remembered trying to help someone who had tripped near the stairs. She remembered pushing through smoke, barely able to breathe, and she remembered falling. When she woke up in the hospital, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Machines beeped softly beside her bed. Her body felt heavy, wrapped in bandages. She tried to move, but pain stopped her. A nurse gently told her to rest. Her family stood nearby, their faces full of worry and relief at the same time. She survived. Doctors called it a miracle. But survival came with a cost. The burns on her back and shoulders were deep. The healing process was long and painful. Weeks turned into months. There were treatments, ointments, and careful dressings. There were nights when she could not sleep because of discomfort. There were mornings when she did not want to wake up at all. Bleh. At first, she did not see the scars. They were covered in bandages. When the bandages finally came off, she asked for a mirror. She thought she was ready. She was not. The reflection staring back at her felt unfamiliar. Angry red and pale silver lines stretched across her back and over one shoulder. The skin was uneven. It looked different from the smooth skin she once knew. She stared at it in silence. Her heart began to beat faster. She did not cry right away. She simply felt something sink deep inside her chest. It was not only pain, it was the feeling of losing something she could never get back. After that day, she stopped asking for mirrors. When she returned home months later, people welcomed her warmly. Neighbors brought flowers. Friends sent cards. They called her brave. They told her she was strong. She smiled politely and thanked them. But every compliment felt far away, like it was meant for someone else. The first time she tried to wear one of her old dresses, she froze. It had a simple zipper at the back and left part of her shoulders visible. She held it in her hands for a long time. Her fingers trembled. Slowly, she put it back into the closet. From that day on, her clothing changed. High necklines. Long sleeves. Thick fabrics. Even during warm days, she layered herself carefully. She told people she felt cold easily now. No one questioned it too much. People often accept simple answers, but the truth was different. She was hiding. She was not afraid of pain anymore. She had already survived that. But what she feared now were eyes. Curious eyes. Pitying eyes. Shocked eyes. She imagined whispers. She imagined someone gasping quietly. She imagined being seen as damaged. So she chose to stay covered. At family gatherings, she sat in corners instead of the center of the room. When photos were taken, she stood at the back. If someone tried to hug her from behind, she gently stepped away and pretended not to notice. She avoided swimming invitations. She stopped going to the beach. Summer became her least favorite season. Before the accident, she loved attending community events. She volunteered at local charity drives and helped organize small celebrations. Now she made excuses. She said she was tired. She said she had work. She said maybe next time. Her laughter became softer, then rarer. People assumed she was still recovering, physically. Some thought time would fix everything. But time alone does not heal the way people think it does. Sometimes it only teaches you how to hide better. At night, when she was alone, she would sit on the edge of her bed and think about the fire. She would remember the heat, the smoke, the fear. Then her mind would shift to the hospital mirror. That image stayed with her. It was not just about appearance. It was about identity. Who was she now? Was she still the cheerful woman who loved bright colors and sunlight? Or was she now only the woman who survived a fire? She began to measure herself by what she had lost instead of what she had kept. She lost her smooth skin. She lost the comfort of wearing whatever she liked without thinking. But she forgot something important. She had kept her courage. She had kept the strength that pushed her through smoke to help someone else. Yet those truths felt distant. One afternoon, while cleaning her closet, she found an old photograph. It was taken just a week before the accident. In the photo, she was wearing a light blue dress, her hair loose, her smile wide and carefree. Sunlight fell across her face. She looked happy, not because everything was perfect, but because she felt free. She traced the image gently with her fingers. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were different. They were not only tears of sadness, they carried longing. She missed that version of herself, not the dress. The freedom to exist without fear of being judged. She folded the photograph carefully and placed it inside a small box by her bed. That night, she lay awake thinking. For months, she had focused on what others might see. But she had never asked herself a simple question. What do I see? When she closed her eyes, she did not see only scars. She saw flames, yes, but she also saw herself helping someone up from the floor. She saw her own hands reaching out despite danger. She saw bravery she had never noticed before. Still, courage and memory did not immediately turn into courage in daily life. The next morning, she dressed the same way she always did, high neckline, sleeves to her wrists. Habits are hard to break, but something small had shifted. When she walked past a mirror in the hallway, she paused, only for a second. She did not turn away immediately this time. She looked at her face. Her eyes looked tired, but they were steady. She whispered softly to herself, "You survived." The words felt strange, almost unreal, yet they carried weight. Her journey was far from over. The fear was still there. The scars were still there. The memories were still there. But deep inside, under layers of fabric and silence, a small spark remained. It was the same spark that once made her laugh freely. It was quiet now. Hidden, but not gone, and, though she did not know it yet, life was slowly preparing her for a moment when she would have to face her fear. Not alone, but in a way she never expected. For now she continued to hide behind fabric and silence. The world saw a quiet woman who preferred modest clothes and calm evenings at home. No one saw the storm she carried inside. No one knew how heavy her invisible weight felt. But storms do not last forever. Months passed, and life slowly settled into a quiet routine. Ilara woke up early each morning, made tea, and sat by the window while the world outside began to move. People walked their dogs, children waited for school buses, and shopkeepers opened their shutters. Everything seemed normal. Yet inside her, there was still a heavy stillness. She had learned how to function again. She went back to work, though not in the same building. She chose a small office with fewer people. Her coworkers were kind, but she kept conversations short. She smiled when necessary and stayed silent when possible. It was easier that way. The less she shared, the safer she felt. One evening, while scrolling through her phone without much interest, an advertisement caught her attention. It was about a cultural retreat in the desert. The words were simple: reconnect, reflect, heal. The retreat was organized by a native Apache community that welcomed visitors who wanted to experience traditional storytelling, nature walks, and quiet reflection. Normally, she would have ignored it, but something about the word heal made her pause. She read more. The retreat focused on emotional healing, inner strength, and learning from nature. It was not about luxury. It was about simplicity. Participants would stay in small cabins, eat traditional meals, and spend time under open skies. She placed her phone down and looked around her apartment. The walls felt close. The air felt heavy. She realized she had not traveled anywhere since the accident, not even for a short trip. The thought scared her. Travel meant being around strangers. Strangers meant unfamiliar eyes, yet another thought followed closely behind. What if this is what you need? For days she went back and forth in her mind. One part of her wanted to stay where everything felt controlled and predictable. Another part whispered that hiding forever was not living. Finally, late one night, she filled out the online form. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed her name. When she clicked submit, her heart beat loudly in her chest. It felt like she had done something brave and foolish at the same time. 2 weeks later, she packed her suitcase. She carefully folded high-necked blouses and long-sleeved dresses, even though the desert was known for warm days. She added a light scarf, just in case. Oh, She looked at herself in the mirror before leaving. Her expression was serious, uncertain. "You can still change your mind," she whispered. But she didn't. The journey to the desert was long. The city slowly disappeared behind her, replaced by wide-open land and endless sky. As the bus moved forward, she watched the landscape change. Buildings turned into fields. Fields turned into dry earth and distant mountains. There was something peaceful about the emptiness. When she arrived at the retreat site, the sun was beginning to set. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange and pink. Small wooden cabins stood in a circle, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of earth and firewood. A group of people stood near a central area, talking quietly. Some looked nervous, others looked curious. Alara stepped off the bus slowly, holding her bag tightly. A woman with kind eyes approached her and welcomed her warmly. "We're glad you're here," she said. Those simple words made Alara's throat tighten. It had been a long time since she felt truly welcomed somewhere new. The retreat began that evening with a small gathering around a fire. One of the Apache elders spoke about the land, about listening to the wind, and about respecting silence. His voice was calm and steady. He explained that healing does not come from force. It comes from understanding. Alara listened carefully. She kept her scarf wrapped neatly around her shoulders. Even in the dim firelight, she felt exposed. Participants were invited to introduce themselves, but sharing was optional. When it was her turn, she simply said her name and that she had come to find peace. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the crackling of the fire. The next morning began early. The group gathered for a quiet walk through the desert. The sand felt warm beneath her shoes. The air was dry but clean. She noticed how open everything felt. There were no tall buildings, no crowded streets, just sky and earth. For the first time in months, she felt her mind grow slightly lighter. During breakfast, she observed the others. Some were older, some younger. Each one carried their own invisible story. She realized she was not the only one who came there with pain hidden beneath calm expressions. Later that day, they were introduced to a quiet Apache man who led many of the healing sessions. His presence was strong but gentle. He did not speak loudly. He did not demand attention. Yet when he spoke, people listened. He talked about scars, not physical ones at first, but emotional ones. He said that everyone carries marks from their past. Some are visible, some are hidden, but all of them shape who we become. Alara felt her chest tighten. She wondered if he somehow knew. Throughout the day, they participated in small activities. They were asked to sit alone for a while and listen to the wind. They were asked to write down something they had been carrying for too long. They were asked to think about what they feared most. When Alara sat alone on a rock overlooking the desert, her thoughts became loud. The wind moved gently through her hair. She closed her eyes. "What do you fear most?" The answer came quickly. "Being seen. Not just physically, but completely." That evening, there was a storytelling circle. The Apache man shared stories of warriors who returned from battles with marks on their bodies. In their culture, those marks were not signs of weakness. They were signs of survival. They showed courage, endurance, and strength. Alara felt something shift inside her again. All her life she had seen her scars as damage, as something to hide. But here, in this quiet desert, the idea of seeing them differently began to take root. After the session ended, she stayed behind while others returned to their cabins. The sky above was filled with stars. She had never seen so many in her life. The silence was deep, but not lonely. The Apache healer approached quietly and stood a short distance away. Did not speak at first, he simply looked at the sky. After a moment he said, softly, "The desert shows everything clearly. There are no walls here." Alara nodded but said nothing. He did not ask her questions. He did not push her to share. He simply said, "You are safe here." Safe. The word echoed in her mind long after she returned to her cabin. That night she sat on her bed holding the edge of her scarf. She thought about the stories she had heard. She thought about the wind, the open sky, the quiet respect in the healer's voice. For the first time she wondered what it would feel like to stop hiding. The thought frightened her. But it also carried a strange sense of relief. The retreat schedule mentioned a symbolic cleansing ceremony the following day near a canyon. Participants would be invited to release something they had been holding on to. It was optional, like everything else. She knew what she had been holding on to. Fear. Silence. As she lay down to sleep, her heart beat faster than usual. Tomorrow might ask something from her, something she had avoided for a long time. Outside, the desert wind moved softly across the land. The stars remained steady in the sky. And deep inside her, beneath layers of fabric and years of hiding, a quiet question began to grow stronger. What if healing is not about hiding the scars, but learning to face them? The morning of the ceremony arrived quietly, almost gently, as if the desert itself understood that something important was about to happen. The sun rose slowly over the wide horizon, spreading soft golden light across the sand and rocks. The air felt calm, but inside Alara, nothing was calm. She had barely slept the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined standing in front of strangers, imagined fabric loosening, imagined eyes on her scars. Her heart would begin to race, and she would sit up again, trying to steady her breathing. When she finally stepped outside her cabin, the cool morning air brushed against her face. She wrapped her scarf a little tighter around her shoulders, even though the temperature was not cold. It had become a habit now, a small shield she carried everywhere. The group gathered near the entrance of a narrow canyon. Tall stone walls rose on both sides, creating a quiet, protected space. A small stream flowed gently over smooth rocks. The sound of water moving over stone felt peaceful, steady, constant. The Apache healer stood near the center, speaking in a calm voice. He explained that the ceremony was symbolic. It was not about physical change. It was about releasing what had been carried too long. Participants would take a small amount of earth clay, mix it with water from the stream, and place it on their hands or arms as a sign of letting go. No one is forced, he said gently. Healing must be chosen. Those words settled into Alara's heart. Healing must be chosen. One by one, people stepped forward. Some closed their eyes as they touched the water. Some whispered quiet prayers. Some wiped tears away. The atmosphere was emotional but respectful. No one stared at anyone else. No one judged. When it was her turn, her feet felt heavy. She could feel her pulse in her hands. She walked slowly toward the water. The canyon walls seemed taller now. The space felt smaller. Her breathing grew shallow. The healer stood a few steps away, giving her room. She knelt beside the stream. The sound of flowing water filled her ears, but her thoughts were louder. She knew that placing clay on her hands would be simple, but something inside her felt unfinished. In the stories shared the night before, warriors had marked their scars with earth as a sign of honor. The thought had stayed with her all night. Her scars were on her back and shoulder. Hidden. Her hands began to tremble. The healer stepped closer, slowly and respectfully. His movements were careful, never sudden. He held a small bowl of clay mixed with water. He did not touch her. He simply stood near enough to offer help if needed. She could feel tears building in her eyes. This was the moment. Not because anyone demanded it, but because she knew. For years she had hidden behind fabric. For years she had allowed fear to decide her actions. If she walked away now, nothing would change. She would return home the same way she arrived, covered, guarded, silent. Her breathing became uneven. The healer gently spoke, his voice low and steady. "Do you not have to carry everything alone?" The words reached deep inside her. Slowly, without looking at anyone, she reached behind her neck. The back of her dress was tied with simple strings. Her fingers touched the knot. Suddenly, panic rose like a wave. "Don't unfasten my dress," she cried, her voice breaking. The words escaped before she could stop them. They were filled with fear, not anger. Fear of being seen, fear of shock, fear of judgment, fear of reliving the moment when she first saw her scars in the hospital mirror. The healer immediately stepped back. He did not argue. He did not insist. He lowered his hands and placed the bowl of clay on the ground beside the stream. The canyon grew very quiet. No one moved. Alara covered her face with her hands, ashamed of her outburst. Her shoulders shook as tears began to fall freely. She felt embarrassed. She felt exposed, even without anything being exposed physically. But something unexpected happened. No one whispered. No one stared. The healer slowly sat down on a nearby stone, leaving space between them. He looked at the flowing water instead of at her. His calm presence did not change. After a long silence, he began to speak softly. "In our tradition," he said, "a scar is not a mark of shame. It is a sign that the body fought to survive. It tells a story of strength. The earth does not hide its cracks. The mountains do not hide their broken edges. They stand as they are." His voice was steady, almost like the stream itself. Alara lowered her hands slightly, listening. "When someone carries pain for too long," he continued, "it becomes heavier than the pain itself." She felt those words deeply. He was not speaking only about skin. He was speaking about the years she had spent hiding, avoiding, shrinking herself to prevent anyone from seeing what had happened. He did not ask her to try again. He did not move closer. He simply sat there, giving her the gift of patience. The wind moved gently through the canyon. The sunlight reflected softly on the water. Time seemed to slow. Inside her, a battle was taking place. One voice said, "Stay safe, stay hidden." Another voice, quieter but stronger than before, whispered, "You are tired of hiding." Her tears slowed, her breathing steadied. She realized something important in that moment. The healer had not tried to unfasten her dress. He had respected her words. For the first time since the accident, someone had stood close to her fear without trying to control it. That respect created space. And in that space, courage began to grow. She lowered her hands completely. Her face was wet with tears, but her eyes were clearer now. She looked at the water flowing over the rocks. It did not rush. It did not force. It simply moved forward, gently but steadily. Very slowly, she reached behind her neck again. This time, her hands were still trembling, but they did not pull away. The knot felt tight under her fingers. Her heart pounded loudly in her chest. She glanced briefly at the healer. He was not looking at her directly. He was watching the water as if giving her privacy even in the open canyon. With a shaky breath, she loosened one string. Nothing dramatic happened. The sky did not change. The world did not collapse. She loosened the second string. The fabric shifted slightly against her back. Tears rolled down her cheeks again, but these tears felt different. They were not only tears of fear, they carried release. She did not fully remove her dress. She simply allowed the back to open enough for air to touch skin that had not felt open air in years. The sensation startled her. Cool air brushed against the scarred surface. She gasped softly. It felt vulnerable, but it also felt real. She did not look behind her to see if anyone was staring. She kept her eyes forward. She felt the warmth of sunlight reach places it had not reached in a long time. The healer quietly picked up the bowl of clay and gently placed it beside her without touching her. "You choose how much," he said softly. Those words meant everything. "You choose." She dipped her fingers into the cool clay. It felt smooth and natural, like the earth itself welcoming her. With trembling courage, she reached back and pressed the clay gently over one of the scars. Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she expected shame to rush in. It did not. Instead, she felt something else. Acceptance. The clay was not hiding the scar. It was honoring it. The cool earth against her skin felt grounding, steady. She pressed more clay gently across the uneven surface, tears falling freely but quietly now. The healer remained silent. The group remained respectful. There was no shock. Only stillness. And in that stillness, something inside her began to change. She realized that the fear she carried had been louder than reality. She had imagined judgment for years. But here, surrounded by earth, water, and sky, there was only understanding. When she finally let her hands fall to her sides, her shoulders felt lighter. The scars were still there. The past was still real. But the shame had loosened its grip. The healer nodded once, not in celebration, but in respect. She had done it herself. No one had unfastened her dress. She had chosen. The clay rested gently against her skin, cool and steady like the earth itself. Elara remained kneeling beside the stream for a long moment after placing it over her scars. The air felt different now. It no longer felt like something that might hurt her. It felt soft, almost protective. Her hands were still shaking slightly, but her breathing had slowed. The fear that once filled her chest like a storm was no longer wild. It was still there, but quieter, like distant thunder fading away. She slowly stood up. The back of her dress was still loose, open enough for sunlight and air to reach the parts she had hidden for so long. She expected to feel exposed, but instead she felt aware. Aware of the wind, aware of her heartbeat, aware of her own strength. The Apache healer rose as well, keeping a respectful distance. He did not clap. He did not speak loudly. He simply placed his hand over his heart and bowed his head slightly. It was a gesture of honor. In that small gesture, she felt seen, not for her scars, but for her courage. The ceremony continued for others, but Elara stepped aside and sat on a smooth stone near the canyon wall. She watched the water flow over the rocks. Each ripple seemed to whisper something gentle. "You are still here. You are still whole." The sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the canyon walls. The clay on her back began to dry slowly. Can feel it tightening slightly against her skin. Instead of discomfort, it reminded her that something real had happened. This was not a dream. She had faced her fear. Memories of the hospital mirror flashed briefly in her mind. The shock, the sinking feeling, The belief that she had lost something forever, that memory no longer felt as sharp. It felt like a chapter in a book, not the entire story. After some time, the healer approached her again, moving slowly so she would not feel startled. "You honored your story today," he said quietly. She looked up at him, her eyes still red from tears but steady. "I was afraid," she admitted. "Courage does not mean the absence of fear," he replied. "It means choosing to stand even when fear is present." His words settled deep inside her. For years she believed courage meant pretending nothing was wrong, smiling, covering up, acting strong. But now she understood something new. Real courage was allowing herself to be seen, even when it was uncomfortable. The group gathered once more near the stream. Each person washed the clay from their hands or arms as a sign of release. When it was her turn, Alara walked slowly back to the water. She hesitated for just a second before kneeling again. This time she did not feel panic. She dipped her hands into the cool stream and gently let water run over her back. The clay softened and slowly washed away, leaving behind the familiar texture of her scars. But something inside her felt different. As the last of the clay slipped into the flowing water, she realized something powerful. The scars were still there, but the meaning had changed. It no longer felt like marks of damage. They felt like proof. Proof that she survived. Proof that her body had fought for her. Proof that she was stronger than the flames that once surrounded her. When she stood again, she did not immediately retie the back of her dress. She allowed herself to feel the open air for a few more moments. The wind brushed gently against her skin, almost like a quiet blessing. The other participants did not stare. Some offered soft smiles. Others simply nodded with understanding. In that shared space, everyone carried something invisible. Everyone understood vulnerability in their own way. Later that afternoon, the group returned to the main area of the retreat. Lunch was simple: warm bread, vegetables, and tea. Alara sat at the wooden table with the others. For the first time since arriving, she did not sit at the edge. She sat in the middle. Conversation flowed more easily now. She even found herself speaking a little more than before. When someone asked how she was feeling, she paused, then answered honestly. "Lighter," she said, and she meant it. That evening, as the sun began to set again, the sky filled with deep orange and soft purple colors, the group gathered around the fire once more. The flames flickered gently, reminding her of the fire that once brought so much pain. But this fire felt different. It felt controlled, warm, safe. Tired of failing. For so long, fire had only represented fear in her mind, but now she could see another side of it. Fire could destroy, yes, but it could also give light. It could bring people together. It could create warmth in cold darkness. The healer began telling another story, this time about transformation, about how the earth changes after storms, about how trees grow stronger roots after strong winds. Alara listened with quiet focus. She thought about the years she had spent hiding, about the invitations she declined, about the summer dresses still hanging untouched in her closet. She realized that she had allowed one painful event to control her entire identity. But today, something had shifted. She had not only faced her scars, she had faced the belief that they defined her. After the storytelling ended, people slowly returned to their cabins. Alara remained by the fire a little longer. The healer approached her once again, but this time she spoke first. "Why didn't you try to convince me?" she asked gently. He looked at the flames before answering. "Because healing cannot be forced. If I had moved without your permission, it would have taken away your power. Today was about you choosing." She absorbed his words carefully. Choosing. For years, she had felt like the accident had taken everything from her. Her confidence, her freedom, her sense of control. But today reminded her that she still had choices. She could choose to hide. Or she could choose to live fully, even with scars. That night, back in her cabin, she stood in front of the small mirror above the sink. Slowly, she untied the back of her dress again, and this time, there was no panic. She turned slightly, enough to see part of her shoulder. The scars were visible in the dim light. They looked the same as before, uneven, pale in some places, darker in others. But her expression was different. There was no flinch, no turning away. She reached back and touched one gently. The skin felt different under her fingers, but it was part of her. It was not an enemy. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she was smiling softly. "I survived," she whispered again. The words felt stronger now. She retied her dress slowly, not because she was ashamed, but because she chose to. That difference mattered. As she lay down to sleep, she felt a calmness she had not felt in years. The canyon, the water, the clay, They were not magical solutions. They did not erase the past, but they helped her see it differently. She understood now that healing was not about removing scars. It was about removing shame. The desert night was quiet outside her window. Stars covered the sky like countless small lights. The wind moved gently across the land, steady and free, and inside her, something new had begun to grow. Not perfection, not complete fearlessness, but courage. The kind of courage that does not shout. The kind that stands quietly and says, "I am still here." The morning she left the desert felt different from the morning she arrived. When Alara first stepped off the bus days ago, she carried fear tightly around her shoulders, like an invisible weight. Now, as she stood outside her small cabin with her suitcase beside her, the air felt lighter. The sky stretched wide and open above her, and for the first time in years, that openness did not scare her. She walked slowly toward the central area where the others were gathering to say goodbye. The Apache healer stood near the fire pit, speaking quietly with another participant. When he noticed her, he offered the same calm nod he had given her before. There were no long speeches between them. No dramatic words, just quiet understanding. "Thank you," she said softly. He placed his hand over his heart again. "Remember," he replied, "the strength was always yours." Those words stayed with her as she boarded the bus. The journey back to the city felt shorter somehow. She watched the desert slowly disappear behind her, replaced by buildings, traffic, and familiar noise. But something inside her had shifted. The city no longer felt like a place to hide. It felt like a place where she could begin again. When she reached her apartment, everything looked the same. The same couch, the same small table, the same quiet walls, yet she did not feel the same inside them. She placed her suitcase down and walked straight to her bedroom. For a moment she stood in front of her closet without moving. Inside hung rows of high-necked blouses and long sleeves carefully arranged. They had been her shield for years. Slowly, she pushed them aside. At the back of the closet, she found the light blue dress from the old photograph, the one she had worn before the accident. She pulled it out gently and held it in her hands. Her heart beat faster, but not with panic, with anticipation. She carried the dress to the bed and sat down. Her fingers traced the fabric. It felt soft, familiar. For a moment, doubt whispered in her mind. What if someone asked questions? But another voice, stronger now, answered quietly. Let them see. That afternoon, she did not wear the dress outside. She simply tried it on inside her apartment. She stood in front of the mirror and slowly turned. The back of the dress showed part of her shoulder. Her scars were visible. Her breath caught in her throat for a second. The old habit of turning away almost returned, but she stayed. She looked carefully at her reflection. The scars were still there, but so was her strength. She did not look broken. She looked real. A small smile appeared on her face. It was not the wide, carefree smile from years ago. It was softer, deeper. It carried experience. She wore the dress around her apartment for the rest of the day. She cooked dinner in it. She cleaned the kitchen in it. She sat by the window in it. Each time she caught her reflection, she forced herself to look, not quickly, not fearfully, but calmly. By evening, something important had happened. The dress no longer felt like a threat. It felt like clothing again. The next challenge came sooner than she expected. A week later, her cousin invited her to a small family gathering. Normally, she would have chosen one of her safe outfits. Something high and closed. Something that guaranteed no questions. She stood in front of her closet again. Her hands hovered between the familiar and the new. Then she made a choice. As she walked to the gathering, her steps felt heavier than usual. She could feel her heart beating loudly in her chest. Every passing car, every person on the sidewalk made her aware of herself. But she kept walking. When she arrived, her family welcomed her warmly. There were hugs, laughter, the smell of food, children running across the room. At first, no one noticed anything different. Then, during a conversation, her aunt's eyes briefly moved to her shoulder. The scar was visible. It was small, almost invisible. Her aunt looked back at her face and continued talking, as if nothing unusual had happened. No gasp, no pity. The world did not stop. Later, one of her younger cousins approached her quietly. "Does it still hurt?" he asked gently, pointing toward her shoulder. The question was innocent. She smiled softly. "Not anymore," she replied, and she realized she was telling the truth, not just about her skin, but about her heart. As the evening continued, she laughed more freely than she had in a long time. She moved through the room without constantly adjusting her clothing. She did not stand in the corner. She did not hide when photos were taken. When someone suggested taking a group picture, she stepped forward naturally. The camera flashed. For the first time since the accident, she did not worry about what the picture would show. That night, back at home, she sat on her bed and thought about everything that had changed. The scars were still part of her story. The fire was still part of her past. But they were no longer controlling her present. Over the next few weeks, small changes continued. She began tying her hair up on warm days, letting her shoulders feel the sunlight. She wore lighter fabrics. She even visited a local park on a bright afternoon, sitting on a bench without covering herself tightly. There were moments of doubt, of course. Healing was not a straight line. Some days, insecurity returned quietly. On those days, she reminded herself of the canyon, the flowing water, the feel of clay against her skin. She remembered how she had chosen to loosen the strings herself. No one forced her. She had done it. That memory became her anchor. Months later, she found herself volunteering again at a community event. She helped organize a small fundraiser for fire safety awareness. Standing there, speaking calmly to visitors, she shared her experience, not in detail, not dramatically, but honestly. "I survived a fire," she said simply, "and I learned that survival is something to honor." The words felt powerful. People listened with respect. She was no longer the woman hiding behind fabric. She was a survivor who had found her voice. One evening, while cleaning her room, she opened the small box beside her bed and looked at the old photograph again, the one taken before the accident. She compared it with a recent photo from the family gathering. In the old photo, she saw innocence. In the new one, she saw strength. Both were beautiful in different ways. She realized something important then. Healing did not mean returning to who she was before. It meant becoming someone new, someone who had faced fear, someone who had walked through fire and still chosen to stand in the light. On a warm summer afternoon, she stood by her window once more, sunlight touching her uncovered shoulder. She closed her eyes and let the warmth rest there. The scars did not disappear. They never would. But they no longer felt like something to hide. They felt like quiet reminders of her courage. Somewhere far away, in the wide desert, the wind continued to move across the canyon walls. The stream still flowed gently over smooth stones. The memory of that day remained alive inside her, the day she cried out in fear, and the day she chose courage instead. The Apache healer had not unfastened her dress. He had given her space, and in that space she found herself again. Not the version from before the fire, but a wiser, braver version. A woman who understood that scars do not reduce beauty. They deepen it. As she looked into the mirror one final time that evening, she did not search for flaws. She saw resilience. She saw survival. And for the first time in many years, her smile reached her eyes completely. She was no longer afraid of being seen. She was finally free.